"You're trespassing. Leave the cabin now or I'm calling the police." That's what she screamed loud enough to send ducks flapping off the lake and shake the leaves off the trees. No knock, no questions, just a full-speed march to my porch, her face burning red, huffing like a bull, phone gripped tight in her hand. Her heels sank into the wet grass, but she didn't even slow down. Her voice cut through the woods like a fire alarm. "I'm the president of this HOA," she barked. "You have no right to be here." I stayed seated, rocking lightly in my old pine chair, a warm cup of coffee in hand, didn't flinch, just looked back at her, steady as the water behind me because I wasn't trespassing. I owned this land, not just this spot, all of it. And she had no clue. The 911 call happened before I even opened my mouth. I watched her stomp around my porch, breathless and dramatic, feeding the dispatcher a load of wild fiction. "There's an elderly man squatting in the lakeside cabin again, the one that's part of our community," she lied. "He's refusing to leave." I'm scared for my safety, but fear wasn't the issue. She wasn't scared, just entitled. The kind of entitled that doesn't bother asking, that doesn't verify anything, that sees someone sitting quietly and assumes it's her right to throw them out. The police arrived in no time, sirens off but lights blazing. 2 officers got out of their SUV, straightening their belts like they were expecting trouble. One, Officer Barnes, surveyed the scene with a narrow-eyed squint. The younger one, Jenkins, looked more confused than anything else. Before they could even question me, I stood slowly, reached into my jacket, and pulled out a single document. I held it up, and not aggressive, just confident. Just as they were about to ask for my ID, the earth beneath us gave a low, steady rumble, like a truck barreling down a gravel road. Only there was no truck, just a deep, echoing silence. Then it came again, louder. Karen stopped shouting. The officers froze. I turned to the edge of the woods near the cabin. That's when we all saw it. They didn't realize it yet, but that sound was the beginning of something I'd been putting together for years. Now let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Daniel Weller. I'm 63, retired, and a big believer in peace and quiet. I bought this cabin by the lake nearly 3 decades ago. Back then, this whole place was wilderness, a swamp, trees, a few scattered fishing shacks, no coffee chains, no boutique stores, just nature, solitude, and guys with fishing poles. The land was dirt cheap, too cheap. Everyone thought I was crazy for buying 6 empty lots around the lake, but I wasn't buying mud and trees. I was buying freedom, room to breathe, a place to disappear. My wife, Eleanor, used to say this lake had healing powers. She was battling cancer, and we'd come here on weekends. I swore when the sun touched her skin and the wind caught her hair, the pain would pause. She called it God's porch. After she passed, I made this place my permanent home. As for the woman on the phone, her name's Patricia, but around here, everyone calls her Karen. She runs the Maple Point hole like a monarch. You can't so much as cough in your own yard without a violation notice landing in your mailbox. She banned bird feeders because squirrels were a nuisance. Fined a neighbor over a wooden mailbox. Even told one family they couldn't fly an American flag without HOA approval. So when a new set of vacation cabins sprang up across the lake, cabins built on land I had quietly leased out, as she thought those, too, were under her command. And when she saw me living in an old cabin that didn't match the sleek glassy structures with their sky-high decks and private spas, she snapped. To her, I was just some random squatter in her pristine neighborhood. She had no idea I was the reason those cabins existed. That I had pushed for the infrastructure, water, power, roads. That the city council came to me with zoning decisions. To her, I was just an old guy on a porch, getting in the way of her perfect little kingdom. Now let me introduce someone else. Amy. She's 27, single mom, recently moved into one of those new lakeside rentals across from mine, works 2 jobs, has a little boy named Luke who's obsessed with fishing. One morning I saw him trying to make a fishing rod out of string and a broom handle. I handed him one of my old rods and showed him how to use it. Karen didn't like that either. Once yelled at Luke for messing up the lake's reflection and said it was ruining her yoga session. Amy pays rent for that cabin. What she doesn't know, is that her rent goes straight to me. I've been using that income to fund a small scholarship at the local college in Eleanor's name. So by the time Karen marched up my porch that day, we already had a long, silent war between us. I'd kept my peace, avoided confrontation, but calling the police, that was the last straw. After hearing both sides, the officers asked for my version. I handed them everything: property deeds, official plans, sign permits. But before they could even start reading, that deep rumble returned, louder this time, more deliberate. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't a truck. It was something bigger, and I knew exactly what it was because I had arranged it. "Is that an excavator?" Jenkins asked, squinting toward the trees. Karen spun around like someone yanked a cord in her spine. "What is that noise? Who's digging on our land?" I took the last sip of my coffee, looked her square inches in the eyes, and said, calm and clear, "Not your land, ma'am." She didn't get it. Not yet. That low rumble, it was the unmistakable sound of heavy construction machinery making its entrance. Not just any machinery. These were massive machines heading straight for the rear of the HOA's property line. They believed that land was theirs. They thought it was some untouchable stretch of preserved park space. What they didn't realize was that the zoning had quietly changed weeks ago, and they especially didn't know who was behind that change. I remained on my porch, watching as the trees swayed and birds took off in a frenzy. The machine as a bulldozers, cranes, earth movers advanced like a mechanical army. Karen stood frozen, mouth agape, completely speechless. And this was only the start. What followed would unravel every illusion of control they had over the area. But it wasn't about spite. This wasn't revenge. It was a lesson, a message about humility, about decency, and above all, about understanding who actually owns the ground they walk on. Where are you tuning in from? Let me know in the comments. And tell me, have you ever faced someone like Karen? Hold tight though, because the real chaos was just beginning. Karen's voice finally returned, but it wasn't steady. It cracked and snapped like a breaking branch. "Stop them. They can't do that. This land is part of the HOA." She tore down the hill toward the machines, waving her arms wildly like she could somehow block 20 tons of steel and diesel with just her outrage. Her blazer flapped behind her like a superhero cape gone wrong, and her high heels punched deep holes in the soft earth as she stumbled forward. At the front of the convoy was Earl, an old friend of mine from the days I worked city infrastructure projects. He sat high up in his bulldozer cab, helmet secure, reflective vest glowing in the sunlight. He barely glanced at Karen, eyeing her like she was some confused garden ornament. She slapped her hand hard against the bulldozer's guardrail and shouted, "I said stop. I am the HOA president of Maple Point. This land is restricted." Earl casually pointed to the laminated site map taped to his dash. "This ain't HOA land anymore, ma'am," he said plainly. "Zoning office approved the reclassification. We've got permits." Karen blinked like her brain had glitched. "Zoning? Reclassification? That's not possible. I'm on the community beautification board." I made my way down the hill slowly, letting the light catch the gray streaks in my hair. The two officers remained near the porch, still examining my paperwork with growing interest. They didn't try to stop me. They were too busy reading the fine print. Karen spun around to face me. "What is happening?" I smiled warmly. "You said I didn't belong here." "I think you may have misunderstood." "I don't care what documents you gave them," she snapped. "You're squatting. This cabin, this lakia, it's all part of the HOA." "No," I said softly, "it isn't. You never looked into the original land deeds. You assumed." "Assumed what?" she hissed. I motioned toward the machines already tearing into the overgrown lot just past the walking trail. "That field back there? It was sold to a private investor 2 years ago." Her expression turned to stone. "That investor," I added, "is me." She stared at me, blank. "That's not possible." "Oh, it's very possible. It's the truth. The HOA never owned that land. Your board leased trail access from the city, quietly. But when the city council couldn't afford to maintain the infrastructure anymore, they offered to sell. No one in your HOA even noticed the land auction." I said, "But I did." Her eyes widened. "You bought that whole field?" I nodded. "And the cabin?" "I built it, long before your neighborhood ever existed. Before bylaws, fountains, trail signs, and color-coded mailboxes. Back when this place was still just a fishing hole." Karen looked like she might faint, but instead, She did something worse. She let out a piercing scream as sharp and furious and then pointed directly at me. "You're just bitter," she shouted. "You're doing all of this because you hate the hoe." Maybe I did resent what the hoe had turned into, but not for the reasons she thought. This wasn't about settling scores. This was about restoring peace for me, for Amy, and for every other resident they had pushed around. But to truly understand, we need to rewind, because this whole thing didn't begin with Karen yelling on my porch. It started 3 years earlier, back when Maple Point began inching its way toward the lakefront under the name of growth. They called it expansion. I called it encroachment. The city was booming, tech firms moved in, land prices spiked, and developers started circling like vultures. That's when the HOA was born, supposedly to protect the charm and order of the community. Sounds noble, doesn't it? It wasn't. What they really wanted was control. They began nitpicking residents over their garden choices, sent notices if someone's mailbox faded unevenly. One family got fined because their child's chalk drawings didn't align with the community theme. And when their expansion reached the lake, they set their sights on my land. First, they put up HOA signs along the trails claiming shared space. Then they installed signs saying home members only, trespassers will be prosecuted. Next came benches on my property like it was already theirs. I warned them twice, sent formal letters, spoke at the city planning meetings, but they didn't care, so I took action quietly, legally. I started buying, bit by bit. First, I bought the land around my cabin, then I secured the field behind it. I even made a few friends in the water treatment department and found out something interesting. The HOA's utility line as a water, power, even communications ran through parcels that weren't officially deeded to them. While they saw nothing but an old man sipping coffee, I was setting the board, strategically placing every piece. And now, those pieces were finally in motion. Back at the construction site, the heavy machinery had torn straight through the old footpath, exposing a tangled mess of outdated pipes. That's when Earl raised his hand, halting the crew, and motioned for me to come over. I walked past Karen, who was now on the phone again, frantically urging the rest of the HOA board to get a lawyer on the line immediately. "What's going on?" I asked Earl. He pointed into the dug-up earth. "Didn't realize there were this many lines. Power, water, some old fiber too." "Yeah," I said. "They're obsolete. The city was supposed to reroute them years ago but didn't have the funds." Earl let out a long whistle. "If we go through with this, we'll knock out power to the entire northern half of Maple Point." I glanced back. Karen was still pacing and shouting into her phone. "Do it," I said softly. "Everything's by the book." And just like that, in darkness, the lights in those pristine, glass-clad cabins blinked once and went out. Lawn sprinklers froze mid-cycle. Even the clubhouse alarm gave a faint dying buzz before fading to silence. Karen dropped her phone and spun toward me. You did this." I didn't answer. I simply pulled out my own phone and made a call. "Go ahead," I said calmly. "Begin phase 2. Her face lost all color. "Phase 2? Right then, across from the HOA's beloved community park, a large flatbed truck rolled up stacked with wood, concrete mix, and fencing material. A second pickup followed, hauling a new sign. The crew hopped out and started unloading. Karen bolted toward them and grabbed one worker by the vest. "What are you doing?" The man looked at her like she was speaking in riddles. "Installing a boundary fence." "What fence?" "The one that marks your HOA's actual limits, ma'am." Karen spun around to find me already halfway up my porch steps, coffee in hand. "You're doing this to be cruel," she shouted. "You're spiteful." I turned just once and replied quietly, "I'm doing this because people like you mistake kindness for weakness." Then I sat down. The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the lake as fence posts went up one by one. Karen had no idea what was still to come. By morning, the HOA would find itself completely encircled, boxed in by its own arrogance. And sure enough, morning arrived to a transformed Maple Point. No more sprinkler systems, no more clubhouse Wi-Fi, no more lake trail to stroll along. Instead, wooden fencing stood tall like sentinels surrounding the community. Bright yellow signs stretched between the posts. "Private property and no trespassing," owned by Daniel Weller. From my porch, I watched as confusion rippled through the neighborhood like a slow-motion storm. Residents peeked through their curtains in robes and slippers, phones clutched tight, unsure of what they were seeing. One by one, they shuffled outside, jaws dropping at the fences in the darkened clubhouse. At exactly 7:14 a.m., Karen came marching toward me, clipboard in hand, flanked by a cluster of nervous board members trailing behind her like confused ducklings. She wore a power suit, flawless makeup, and heels that clicked like accusations. "Mr. Weller," she called out, voice sharp, "we are demanding an immediate meeting." I didn't reply, just let the silence hang there. That's when Amy stepped onto the porch beside me. She often brought banana bread before heading to work. Her son, Luke, stood behind her, gripping his fishing rod. Karen blinked, clearly struggling to process the calm presence of two people she couldn't control, standing peacefully on land she'd assumed was hers. Amy looked around. "Is everything alright?" "No," Karen snapped. "Everything is not alright. This man has installed an illegal fence around our neighborhood. He's cut off our utilities, and he's about to be served with a cease and desist." Amy looked from Karen to me. "Illegal? I thought all of this was his land." Karen's mouth dropped open. "Excuse me?" Amy turned back to me, brow furrowed. "Is that true? All of it?" I gave her a slow, steady nod. Karen stepped in again. No, don't believe this nonsense. He's lying and manipulating you all with fake documents and spreading panic." Amy raised her hand to stop her. "Actually, I've seen the paperwork. You rent my cabin to me. You fixed my gutters. You paid for Luke's school supplies. I know exactly who Mr. Weller is." Karen froze. "And who exactly is that?" she hissed. Amy smiled softly. "The man who owns the land your entire HOA sits on." Karen's hands began to shake. The board members behind her exchanged nervous whispers. I finally stepped forward. "You asked for a meeting?" I said. "Let's have one." But I didn't lead them to the porch or the cabin. Instead, I brought them down to the open field cleared by the heavy equipment where the trail used to loop through the trees. We stood together in that wide, quiet space, freshly tilled earth beneath our feet, birds singing, a light breeze rustling through the air. And then I said, I stood in the center of a tight circle, faces tense, some worn out, others clearly upset. The board members had gathered, and now they were waiting. I looked at them all and spoke plainly. "You built a fortress on borrowed land," I said. "You targeted decent folks, harassed tenants, turned this community into something that felt more like confinement than home." Karen stepped forward defensively. "We had rules. That's the purpose of an HOA, to provide order, security, and standards." I nodded slightly. "Standards that fined a man $300 just for painting his shed red," I said quietly. "Standards that told Amy her kid's sidewalk chalk art didn't match your so-called community aesthetic. You had police confront a man relaxing on his own porch. No due process, no facts, just control." She didn't have a response. "So," I continued, "I purchased the neighboring lots because I knew this day would come. I fenced them legally. The city granted me the rights. I'm not breaking laws, I'm preserving peace." Then one of the board members stepped forward, a tall man named Charles, the HOA treasurer. He cleared his throat, his tone respectful. "With all due respect, Mr. Weller, a broken bar, what is it you want from us?" I met his gaze. "Nothing." A stunned silence passed through the group like a gust of wind. Some gasped. I smiled slightly. "I don't want your money. I don't care about your clubhouse. I don't need 1 inch of your well-manicured lawns." Karen scowled. "Then why cage us in like animals?" I looked at her evenly. "So you understand what it feels like to live under restrictions you never agreed to. You imposed that on others. Now it's your turn." She folded her arms tightly. "This is just a stunt." "No," I said. "It's a mirror." The group murmured quietly among themselves. Later that day, residents tried to access the usual bike trail, only to find it had been erased and now covered in fresh soil and clear warning signs. Others attempted to reach the lake through their familiar shortcut, but were met by newly planted garden beds and native flowers I'd carefully arranged on land I owned. By nightfall, my inbox filled with emails from Maple Point residents. Some apologized, others asked for a meeting. Many hoped to settle things. But I didn't reply. Not yet, because I wasn't done proving my point. The next morning, there was a knock at my door, not from Karen or the authorities, but from Amy. She stood quietly with a folded paper in hand. "This was taped to my door," she said. "It's from Karen." I unfolded the note. "Dear residents, as acting president, I urge you to remain calm. Our legal counsel is seeking an emergency injunction. Mr. Weller is a threat to our community. Do not engage." Amy looked tired. "They're twisting it." I nodded. "Of course they are." She hesitated. "Daniela Brokenbar, they're not afraid of you. They're afraid of losing their grip." That's when I told her something I hadn't told anyone yet. This wasn't just about fences. I was building something that would shift their whole reality. But before I could explain further, a loud crash shattered the moment. A rock smashed through my kitchen window. Amy screamed. Luke, who had been fishing at the dock, dropped his rod and ran toward us. Karen stood across the clearing, chest heaving, her hand still half raised. She had thrown the rock. She was shaking, unhinged, and that was only the beginning. She charged across the clearing, yelling at the top of her lungs, "You think you're some kind of king? You think you can trap us like rats and mock us? You don't own us." I stepped protectively in front of Amy. Karen's eyes burned with fury. "You're not a neighbor," she spat. "You're a dictator." More residents gathered behind her, drawn by the commotion. Some looked uncertain, others were angry. One man lifted his phone and began recording. Amy clutched Luke, who clung to her leg. I said nothing. I didn't have to, because that moment revealed Karen for who she really was: not a leader, not a guardian, but a ticking time bomb. And her clock had just struck 0. The video went viral before nightfall. Someone from the crowd had captured it. Karen screaming, the glass exploding, the rock lying on my kitchen floor beside the coffee mug I'd used every morning since Eleanor passed. The video was titled, "HOA President Attacks Elderly Cabin Owner for Owning Too Much Land." It spread fast, first through local Facebook groups, then onto Twitter, Nextdoor, even a small-town gossip channel on YouTube. By the time the local news ran the footage, Karen's name was trending. I never posted the video. I didn't even forward it, but someone from within her own ranks had. And by morning, Maple Point wasn't whispering anymore. They were in full uproar. The next day, an emergency home meeting was scheduled in town hall style. The banner outside read, "Special Session, a Community Crisis Discussion, a HOA Perimeter Conflict." Funny how they called it a conflict, not what it truly was: a reckoning. I had no plans to attend. I didn't belong to the HOA. They'd reminded me of that from day one. But at exactly 5:57 p.m.a. just 3 minutes before the meeting began, someone knocked on my door. It was Charles, the treasurer. He looked haggard, his tie loosened, face weary. "Mr. Weller," he said, "you might want to be there. It's getting out of hand." I glanced past him and saw the narrow Lake Road packed of cars, golf carts, even some on bikes, all streaming into the small meeting hall just beyond the Maple Point gate. Charles lowered his voice. "They're asking questions. They want answers. Not from here, a broken bar from you." That gave me pause. They'd seen me as the problem, the troublemaker, the outsider. Now they wanted to hear from me. I nodded slowly and picked up I threw on my coat and followed him up the hill. The moment I stepped into the room, everything froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Eyes turned toward me. Even Karen, sitting rigid at the head of the table in a blazer and pearls, went still. But I kept walking straight to the front. Karen rose from her seat. "You're not on the agenda," she said. Someone in the crowd spoke up. "We want to hear from him." Another voice added, "He owns the land we're standing on. Listening is the least we can do." A quiet ripple of agreement moved through the room. Karen's jaw tightened, but she stayed silent. I took my place at the podium. No microphone, just my voice. "Good evening," I began. "I'm Daniel Weller. Many of you know me as the man who owns the cabin on the lake's east side. Some of you blame me for the current chaos in your HOA." Silence. I drew a breath. "But I've been here longer than anyone else. Long before the HOA existed, before the streetlights, before the polished brochures called this place a gated retreat." A woman raised her hand. "Is it true? Did you buy all the land surrounding us?" I nodded. "Yes." "Not all at once. It took years, all legal." Quiet. A man called out, "Then why the fences? Why shut everything down?" I turned toward Karen briefly, then back to the crowd. "When you've been ignored long enough, You start building barriers. Some people looked away. Others slowly nodded. I asked for peace. I continued. I asked for respect. In return, I got complaints, threats and eventually, a 911 call accusing me of trespassing on my own land. Karen finally broke her silence. You've humiliated this neighborhood, cut off utilities, closed trails. You've made life unbearable. I turned to face her. I simply held up a mirror, and what you saw reflected back at it was your doing. You fined people for hanging bird feeders. You cited children for chalk drawings. You made neighbors feel imprisoned in their own homes. She scoffed. And now you're building something right behind our houses. What is it? A warehouse? A factory? A dump? I gave her a gentle smile. None of those. Then what? I looked at the board. A public library, free to all, no memberships, no HOA rules, no penalties, just books, calm, and a view of the lake. Gasps rippled through the room. Charles blinked. You're building a library, with a small coffee garden and a walking trail for reading. I added. It's what Eleanor would have wanted. She was a teacher. Always said books were the only fences worth putting up. Karen was speechless, but an older man at the back wasn't. My grandson stopped visiting after the HOA fined me for putting up a basketball hoop, he said. Maybe this library will bring him back. Another voice chimed in. I thought you were the villain, Mr. Weller, but now, I'm not sure. That's when the shift began. Not loud, not dramatic, and just a quiet current of truth moving through the room. By the time I stepped outside, the night air felt calm and full of something new. Amy was waiting, Luke standing beside her. You did well, she said. I didn't do anything special, I replied. Just told the truth. But just as we turned to leave, Karen burst out behind us, phone pressed to her ear. I don't care what the board says, she barked. He's fooling everyone with that wise old man routine. There has to be something in their bylaws to stop him. Amy and I paused. Karen hadn't noticed us. She was too focused on her rage. That's when Luke, small but brave, tugged my sleeve and whispered, Is she going to fight you again? I crouched down beside him. Maybe, I said with a soft smile, but not all battles are fought with fists. As we walked away, I looked back just in time to see Karen end her call. She met my gaze and smiled, and not a smile of surrender. It was the kind of smile that warned, you don't know what's coming. 2 days later, I found a thick yellow envelope taped to my cabin door. It had a sticker, urgent, a hand-delivered, Maple Point Whole Legal Department. I didn't even need coffee to feel the dread settle in. I peeled it open slowly. A dense stack of papers spilled out as stamped, signed, and sealed. Cease and desist. Karen had officially made her move. She was accusing me of harassment, unauthorized construction, and even causing psychological distress to home members. The letter was bloated with dramatic language of phrases like malicious enclosure of community property and intentional disruption of neighborhood stability. I laughed, not because it was amusing, but because it reeked of desperation. She was swinging blindly now, but one line stood out. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in immediate escalation to municipal court and a formal restraining order. I leaned on the porch railing and exhaled slowly. She wasn't backing down, but she had handed me something far better. Undeniable proof of a fight. Later that day, I met my attorney in town. Linda, sharp as a blade, mid-50s, silver-haired, and unflinchingly direct, flipped through the paperwork with seasoned ease. After a few minutes, she leaned back in her chair and said, This is ridiculous. They're threatening to sue you. She grinned slightly. Let them try. You've got everything you need, Linda said, sliding out her own folder. Zoning's approved. Your ownership records are solid. The permits for fencing are clean, and the city's on board with the library. If they want to fight, they'll end up embarrassing themselves. I nodded slowly. That's what I figured. But I'm looking for more than just a courtroom win. Linda gave me a knowing look. You want a win that people can see. I met her eyes. I want them to remember what it means to be a good neighbor. She smiled. Then let's remind them where you come from. Without another word, she picked up her phone and dialed a number I hadn't heard in years, of the local newspaper. Within an hour, a journalist named Jesse arrived at my cabin. Early 30s, smart glasses, and the rare kind of reporter who listened more than he spoke. We walked down the garden path I planted beside the new library trail. The fence stood tall in the distance, birds chirping softly from the posts. "I want to make sure I've got this straight," Jesse said. "You've owned this land since before the HOA even existed?" "That's right," I told him. "And you started buying the surrounding parcels after the HOA began encroaching on public trails and shared spaces?" "Exactly." "And now, instead of building a resort or a shopping center, you're putting up a library?" I smiled. "Books don't fine you for having the wrong shade on your mailbox." He chuckled. Then his tone shifted. "What would you say to the HOA president's accusation that you're intimidating residents?" I paused, then pointed to the window still covered with a wooden board. "She threw a rock through that, in front of my tenant, in front of a kid. I didn't file charges." "I could have, but that's not why I'm here." "Then what is your goal?" Jesse asked. I looked him in the eye. "To remind them that kindness isn't something you regulate, it's a decision." He closed his notebook. "That's your headline." The article ran the following morning. The headline read, "Cabin Man or Community Hero? Local Resident Fights HOA with Kindness and Books." It included photos of me teaching Luke to fish, helping Amy carry groceries, even one of me planting wildflowers along the new trail. The story spread faster than the rock Karen had thrown. Comments flooded in. "We need more people like him. HOAs have turned into tyrants. This man deserves a statue." By noon, the mayor's office reached out. They wanted to feature the library in their annual Community Resilience Report. Karen, predictably, doubled down. That very day she called an emergency HOA board meeting to introduce something called Resolution 9C. External Threat Countermeasures. Its key clause: any resident seen interacting with me, including waving, saying hello, or even walking past me on public land, would be fined $500 and issued a formal infraction. People quickly started calling it the "Don't Talk to Daniel" rule, but it backfired immediately. Neighbors began coming over more often. Some brought cookies, others brought lawn chairs and sat by the fence, reading aloud from dusty old novels. A man named Roger showed up with a bookshelf and asked if I could help set it up early. The more Karen tried to isolate me, the more people rallied around. But just as the sun was setting over the lake that evening, something unexpected happened. A sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway. Two men in dark suits stepped out. I walked out to meet them, wary. One of them flashed a badge. "Mr. Weller, County Property Office. We need to discuss a formal complaint filed by the Maple Point HOA." I gestured toward the porch. "Come on up." They stayed put. One of them pulled a file from his briefcase. "According to the complaint, recent construction on your property exceeds the originally permitted land use. There's also a claim that your fencing cuts across an undocumented utility line servicing the city's northeast grid." My smile disappeared. I hadn't heard a word about any of that. Karen had found a new angling and obscure lopolia, and just like that, this had gone from neighborhood squabble to county-level sabotage. "I'd like to review that file," I said quietly. He handed it over. Inside were blueprints, permits, signatures, and old zoning maps, some legitimate, some clearly altered. It didn't take long to see what was happening. Karen had contacted every possible agency: city clerks, utilities, zoning boards, doing everything she could to halt construction. She was trying to get my fencing torn down under emergency infrastructure regulations. If she pulled it off, the library wouldn't just face Dilza, it might never open at all. I stood there, silent, as one of the officers added, "We'll need to conduct a full survey within 48 hours. Until then, all work must be paused." They turned and walked back to their vehicle. I didn't say a word. I just stared down at the rolled-up documents in my hand, realizing the truth. She was willing to destroy everything, just to hold on to control. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced the old floorboards of the cabin Eleanor and I had built together, back when life felt simpler. Moonlight came in through the broken kitchen window, falling across the table where I'd spread every survey map, deed, and permit I had. Linda was already calling her contacts in zoning and utilities from her home office. But I knew Ivana Karen had found a real crack. Not in my property, in my plans. It wasn't just the land she targeted, it was the system itself. She unearthed a long-forgotten utility map, likely decades old, and used it to request a temporary injunction on my fence posts. Her claim? One of them might interfere with an unregistered maintenance path tied to an old underground line. It didn't matter that no one had touched that pipe in over 20 years. It didn't matter that the city's official blueprints made no mention of it. Truth didn't matter, only the delay. And it was working. Construction came to a standstill. The library stood unfinished, sheet of concrete poured, walls up, but no roof above. Worse still, county inspectors were scheduled to arrive by the end of the week for a full review. If her claims shook them even slightly, they had the authority to revoke every permit I'd secured. And if that happened, Karen could win. The next morning, I stepped outside to find Amy already waiting on the porch. Luke stood beside her, holding a small paper cup filled with lemonade. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said gently. I gave her a tired smile. "Didn't feel much like sleeping." She reached into her pocket and handed me a folded piece of notebook paper. "Luke made this for you." I unfolded it. It was a crayon drawing of the library, tall and cheerful, full of stick figures smiling inside. In one corner was a figure holding a fishing pole. Above it, the title, Mr. Daniel's Bookhouse. Something inside me cracked wide open. "I can't let this fall apart," I said, voice raw with emotion. "Not now, not after everything." Amy sat next to me. "Then don't." I turned to her. "You've been strong, and you've been kind," she continued, "but maybe broken bar, maybe it's time to stop being only kind." I raised an eyebrow. She leaned in. "It's time to fight back." So I did. First, I called Linda, then Jesse, the reporter. Then I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Mayor Ellen Park. Years ago, she and I had served on the same volunteer committee, back when the city still held town potlucks and the lake felt like the edge of the world. She answered after just 2 rings. "Daniel?" she said, surprised. "It's been a long time." "It has," I replied. "But I need your help." Over the next 3 days, while Karen and the HOA scrambled to build their case, I built a coalition. Residents, journalists, even city staff who had quietly watched Karen's intimidation from afar. We gathered every zoning map she had manipulated and leaked them to the press. Lyndon uncovered 3 emails where Karen had offered a former city inspector a weekend retreat at the clubhouse in exchange for a quick glance at my fencing. We had documentation, we had witnesses, and most of all we had the truth. So when the county officials arrived with clipboards in hand and survey tools ready, I wasn't standing alone. The lead inspector stepped out of his SUV, eyebrows rising at the sight of nearly 30 people gathered behind me. Amy stood with Luke beside her. Charles, a member of the HOA board, was there too. Roger showed up with his mobile bookshelf. Even some of the quieter Maple Point residents, people who had never so much as waved at me, stood by my side. Karen loitered off to the side, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Sir," the inspector said, addressing me, "we're here to evaluate a possible interference with public utility access." I handed him a folder. Inside, you'll find every permit, survey, soil analysis, zoning approval, and maintenance record, all updated, all certified. He flipped through the documents, brows furrowing in surprise. "This is more thorough than what we have in our own archives," he murmured. I smiled faintly. "Would you like to see the location in question?" We walked the trail together, past the garden beds, past the newly installed fencing, all the way to the flagged section Karen had reported. The inspector scanned the area, tapped his boot against the dirt, and let out a low chuckle. "This line isn't active," he said. "It was capped a decade ago. Doesn't lead anywhere." Karen stormed toward us. "That's not what the utility board said. That line supports the northern grid." The inspector looked at her calmly. "Ma'am, I am the utility board," he replied, "and this line is officially retired." Silence followed. I heard Luke whisper to his mother, "Did he win?" But we weren't done. Just as the inspector signed off on his report, a sleek black car pulled onto the dirt road. Out stepped Mayor Ellen Park. She walked straight up to me, a warm smile on her face. "I wanted to see this in person," she said, "and give you this myself." She handed me an envelope. I opened it slowly. Inside was a formal letter from the city council. "In recognition of your efforts to preserve public spaces and promote literacy, the city of Maple Point is proud to announce full municipal partnership in the completion of the Lakeside Library project." They were going to help fund it. Karen's jaw fell open. "The what?" she gasped. "You can't support him. He's been sabotaging the HOA." Ellen turned to her, her voice calm and unwavering. "No," she said. "You've been sabotaging the community." Mr. Weller reminded us what a community is supposed to be. Karen opened her mouth again but no words came. She stood frozen, eyes burning, watching as the inspector finalized his signature and handed the report back. The crowd around me erupted into gentle applause. I didn't cheer, I just looked at Karina, a woman who had spent years building fences around people's hearts instead of their home, and said quietly, "You could have helped build this, but you chose to rule it." She turned and stormed off. But I knew in my gut this wasn't over, because later that night, as I sat on the porch, staring at the moonlight stretching across the half-finished library, something flickered in the darkness just beyond the tree line. A faint orange flicker, then another, then more. Something was burning and it was inside the fence. At first, the flames were small, barely brighter than a match strike in the night. But I knew fire. I'd grown up around it, chopped logs for it, seen it rip through a neighbor's kitchen after a heater malfunctioned. This wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. I grabbed the garden hose and bolted toward the glow, boots crunching across gravel and damp grass. Smoke filled my lungs before I even made it to the first standing frame of the library. The far side of the part meant to house the reading co was already engulfed. Wood snapped and hissed in the heat like brittle bones. Blisters formed and burst across the paint. The plywood siding, which we'd just finished 2 days earlier, was now dancing with fire. I didn't think, I just moved. I sprayed water wildly, trying to soak the surrounding ground, praying it wouldn't creep toward the cabin. My hands trembled. The hose pressure was weak. But I didn't stop. I shouted for help, and then, like a chorus of salvation, I heard running footsteps behind me. Amy, Luke, Charles, Roger. One by one, neighbors poured in with buckets, pitchers, even lake water and whatever they could carry. No one said a word. We fought the fire like it had insulted every one of us personally. 20 minutes of chaos, 40 minutes, and the fire was out. Smoke coiled into the sky like a breath finally exhaled. Ash floated down like gray snow. Around me stood a soaked, coughing, red-eyed crowd, clothes drenched, lungs burning, and I realized right then, this wasn't just my library anymore. It belonged to them now. Amy gently touched my arm. "This wasn't random." "No," I replied quietly. "It wasn't." And then, like fate arriving late, a car rolled up the dirt road. Karen stepped out casually in silk pajamas and sandals, like she'd just woken up or dropped by to enjoy the aftermath. "What happened?" she asked with a falsely sweet innocence, eyes fixed on the charred wall. No one answered. We just stared. She walked closer, clasping her hands. "Such a shame," she cooed. "Maybe it's a sign. Maybe this project just a broken bar wasn't meant to be." That broke the silence. Roger stepped forward, face streaked with soot. "Are you kidding me?" Karen blinked. "Excuse me, you did this?" he growled. "Maybe you didn't light the fire yourself, but this was you." "Every bit of it." Her voice tightened. "I don't know what you're accusing me of." Charles cut in. "No more games, Karen. You've dragged this entire neighborhood through hell of lies, manipulation, sabotage, and now this." Her smile started to crack. Amy added, "You've turned people against each other, threatened families, bullied kids." Karen turned to me, eyes wide. "You're just going to stand there and let them attack me?" I looked at her for a long moment. Then I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a flash drive. "Actually," I said, "I don't have to say anything." She frowned. "What is that?" "This." I held it up. "This is the end of your story. You see, I'm old school but I'm not careless." I had trail cams, small and quiet, mounted in the trees lining the path, and those cameras had caught Karen walking that path at 2:18 a.m. Gaskin in hand. That footage had already been saved in 3 places: my laptop, Linda's inbox, and the city's secure archive. Later that morning, I gave the flash drive to the fire marshal. Everything changed. The police came. They asked questions. Karen's smug confidence evaporated. Turned out she'd paid a local teen to help sneak onto the property to scare us with a small, controlled blaze. Just enough to delay things, she'd said. The kid confessed instantly. By noon, Karen was arrested for arson, conspiracy, reckless endangerment. Her whole position was stripped within 24 hours. The story hit the news with a headline that made the rounds fast. HOA president sets fire to community library project. Arrested after viral outrage. Her mugshot sat right beside a picture of me, Amy, and Luke holding a brand new sign in front of the damaged structure. Still building, because we were. The fire didn't end the dream, it sparked something bigger. People showed up daily after that. Volunteers brought books. Townsfolk donated supplies. A local contractor rebuilt the burned wall for free. Even the mayor returned, this time with a paintbrush. 3 months later, the Lakeside Library opened its doors. No fines, no fees, just stories. On opening day, I stood at the entrance with a ribbon in hand, and there was Lukia standing proud in a tiny red vest marked Junior Librarian. Amy leaned in and whispered, "You did it." I shook my head. "No," I said. "We did." Because kindness, a true kindness, it takes time. It's often mistaken for weakness. Sometimes, it even gets attacked. But when it catches fire, it shines. And as the sun sank behind the lake and the library lights flickered to life for the very first time, I settled into my old pine chair, coffee warming my hands, heart overflowing. Peace wasn't just a dream anymore. It was home.